Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cinema Heroes. I'm Justin Speck.
I'm Jake Stu.
And today we are talking about The Fantastic Four. Released in 2015, directed by Josh Trank, written by Josh Trank, Jeremy Slater, and Simon Kinberg, and starring Miles Teller, Kate Mara, Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Bell, Reg E. Cathy, Tim Blake Nelson, and Toby Kebbell as Victor Von Doom. This was, like I said, released in 2015, and it was a box office bomb. It did not do well. Studio interference, we've talked about this a little bit. The director, kind of famously tweeted, I think on opening day, or at least opening weekend, that he had directed a, quote, fantastic version of this, pun intended, I assume, that we will never get to see. And he was like, it would have gotten fantastic reviews. He was like, but that's reality. And then he quickly deleted it. And according to IMDb trivia, that tweet supposedly cost the movie a lot of money in opening weekend because people realized that it wasn't the movie that the director wanted to make. But also, I think it just got bad reviews and people probably didn't go see it because they saw the reviews and were like, nah, I'm not wasting my time.
Yeah. It was, we knew about all the reshoots and changes well before that tweet. Yeah. I mean, tweet or not, this movie would have bombed.
Yeah.
And I 100% believe the director that he had a fantastic Four movie that we'll never get to see. Even Toby Kebbell was behind that. He said that the script was brilliant, and it's unfortunate that we'll never get to see Josh Trank's original vision, because you can see little glimpses of his original vision in this movie. And just getting right into it, I have kind of a soft spot for this movie because of that. Most of the first half of this movie is actually really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a point where it just takes a nosedive off of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
And becomes a different movie.
Yeah. Did you see this in the theater?
I did.
You did?
I saw it opening weekend.
Yeah, I did too. I can't remember if I saw it opening. I probably did see it opening weekend. Because why not?
You, me, and 3 other people.
Yeah, exactly. But I had not watched it since I saw it in the theater. And I don't remember hating it, but I remember thinking it was not good.
Mm-hmm.
And I have notes here on what I thought about it this time. And I do think it's a shame that we'll never see Josh Trank's version. I wish in situations like this, and I know the studio would not allow this, but I wish they would release the shooting script online. So that way we could at least read what the movie would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that got leaked, I think that would be fun to read, just to see where the original version would have gone.
Yeah, I honestly think in the future more of that is going to happen, because studios aren't going to change. They're still going to make their demands. They're still going to make their changes. And I think with the way technology is going, with stuff like this and Zack Snyder and the directors of Batgirl, situations like that, I think people are going to find a way to back up their original vision in case stuff like
Studios
this happens.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I definitely think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. However, I would say, I would love to be able to see Josh Trank's original version, but there's a part of me that still wonders. I'm not 100% convinced that it still would have been a good Fantastic Four movie. It might have been a good movie, but I don't know if it would have been a good Fantastic Four movie. And part of that is just because there are certain things that I don't know if I'm totally on board with this version. And it's part of that is the younger cast. And I understand it's like an origin story, and they decided not they decided to kind of have them be younger when they get their powers and everything. But part of me, it's just weird. It's just kind of weird for me to see Reed Richards played by such a young actor, and Jamie Bell as Ben Grimm. I think I wrote down that he plays Ben Grimm very well, but physically he's not Ben Grimm. And part, it's just he's you always, the way Ben Grimm is always kind of depicted in the comics and everything, he's like this big guy, like a
football player,
right? Yeah, exactly. And Jamie Bell is not. Yeah, he's not. He's just not a big guy. He looks kind of short, and he's not like out of shape, but he's not like a big football player type guy. And so I think he embodied kind of the spirit of Ben Grimm, but just doesn't. It's not who I would have necessarily picked to play Ben Grimm.
I can agree with that. When he got casted, I think everybody had their opinions, their reservations. Yeah. I mean, with most of the cast, everybody had their reservations. But once the movie started, and like you said, he had the spirit of Ben Grimm. I was on board. It didn't matter to me whether he was 5'7" or 6'7",
right?
Because he portrayed him well. Now that being said, he was severely underutilized in this movie.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, everybody is essentially underutilized in this movie.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the big problems with it. And not to skip ahead, but that I wrote down the movie. I paid attention to when the credits started rolling, and it's an hour and 33 minutes is when the end credits start rolling. So if you don't count the credits, this movie's only 93 minutes long. They don't get their powers until about 55 minutes into the movie. So it's a lot of setup and then very little Fantastic Four.
Yes.
And I know part of that is the whole studio thing. You can see some of the reshoots. The most obvious reshoots are when Kate Mara is on screen because she's wearing a wig.
Terrible wig.
Yeah. That doesn't match her hair at all.
At all.
And so you can just see, there was obviously those weird reshoots that happened, and they reworked the movie.
Yeah.
But I agree.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I agree with you in terms of the first half of the film is way stronger than the second half of the film.
Absolutely.
And you don't see too many of those reshoots in the first half of the film. So the first half is clearly Josh Trank, and then the second half is studio.
Yeah, there are one or two reshoots
in the
beginning, and I think both of them are in the lab.
Okay, yeah,
at the Baxter Building. But yeah, that second half is almost exclusively reshoot.
Yeah,
and it's unfortunate because like we said, that first half is really strong, and I was really on board with what Josh Trank was doing because he essentially wanted to do the Fantastic Four version of Man of Steel and make it darker and make it a drama, essentially, that is a superhero that happens to take place in the world of superheroes. And I was on board with that because the Fantastic Four are Marvel's first family, famously Marvel's first family, and with that comes a lot of drama. So from a conceptual standpoint, it makes sense to do that. Now, there are some character dynamics that are changed a little bit in this movie. We don't get a whole lot of the banter and bickering because they're pretty much all meeting each other for the first time.
Right.
And they don't spend a whole lot of time together, the four of them or the five of them, if you include Victor.
Right.
But again, I was okay with that because I see what he was trying to do is just that he couldn't stick the landing, and that I don't think that was his fault.
Right. I don't think so either. I think, again, if we could see the original movie, maybe those, that stuff would have been kind of fleshed out more in the second half of Trank's version.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. And some of that bickering is seen between like Johnny and Victor, less so than like Johnny and Ben, because they don't even other than Reed, nobody meets Ben until Reed convinces him to come and get in when they teleport themselves.
Yeah, and that was something that I didn't like. I was like, Reed and Ben are best friends, and Ben is barely in this movie.
Yeah.
Or at least, the first half. He's barely in the first half. But the two most underutilized characters are Ben and I would say Victor. Even though he's in a good chunk of the first half, I don't think Josh Trank went deep enough with what he was trying to do with Victor. Victor is very anti-establishment. One could say he's almost an environmentalist, and there are a lot of good nuggets in this version of Victor Von Doom, because it takes his principles from the comic book, because Victor he's a bad guy. He's one of the best villains ever. In comics. But he's a bad guy, but he genuinely wants the world to be a better place. And they take some of that and put it in this version of Victor. And I wish he would have come across more tragic instead of just angry and mean.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I wrote was I liked the aspect of Victor liking Sue and being jealous of Reed, because Reed and Sue seem to be kind of getting along, not necessarily having a relationship, but just kind of getting along, basically. Yeah. And I kind of like that little, it gives him kind of a reason to dislike Reed, and I like that aspect of it, but it doesn't really, it just kind of doesn't go anywhere. And it's, I don't know. I really liked Toby Kebbell as Victor, but Dr. Doom, I don't love the design of Dr. Doom, and then he's just so. I wrote down, it appears that they kill off Doom at the end of this movie, and I said that would be a terrible disservice to the character.
Absolutely,
if he's killed off in this movie, because he's barely a presence. He's not anything like the Dr. Doom from the comics. No. He's not this big threat. He basically just wants to be left alone, and he's going to destroy our world so that he can be left alone on his world. And it just is, it's not Dr. Doom.
It sounds like the studio wrote the end of the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Sounds like a bunch of people who have never written a movie wrote a movie.
Right. Yeah. And that's what this movie kind of felt like. It felt like the second half of the movie felt like it was written by somebody who did not know how to write a movie.
Right. I don't hate Dr. Doom's look. I like the idea of it.
Sure.
The exosuit melted on his skin.
Right.
That is just, that's super sci-fi. I love that. And then his cloak is the flag, which from a story standpoint, like from a character development, introspective story standpoint, that is actually brilliant, because it's almost like he's taking a dump with the flag by wearing it. He's like he's mocking it almost. I mean, obviously he was wearing it to protect himself and kind of keep himself warm. I guess it's cold on Planet Zero, but I like the idea of his look, and I like the green glowing eyes. I don't like the shape of his head. It's too bulbous, but again, I don't hate it. I definitely prefer Julian McMahon's look.
Yeah, I do too. It's a little more classic. I kind of agree with you. I like the idea. I like the concept of it's his suit that kind of fused onto him rather than him just wearing a mask. It's just, I do like the green eyes, but I just don't love the look of it. I think they could have made it a little better. And part of that is his head, and I think he looks better when he's got the cloak on rather than like when he's going through the facility just killing people.
Agreed.
It just doesn't look quite as good when he doesn't have the cloak. I did wonder where he got the cloak from, and so now that you mentioned it's the flag, I actually think that's kind of genius.
Oh yeah. I thought that was obvious. I didn't know.
I didn't pick up on it, but maybe I'm just an idiot.
No. Yeah, like I said, I didn't hate his look, but it's just the biggest thing for me is that his motivations were paper thin, and they could have had such a fantastic version of Doctor Doom.
Yeah,
because I see, like I said, I see it. I see what Josh Trank wanted to do, and it really makes me mad that he didn't get to do it.
Yeah. How do you feel about Kate Mara and Michael B. Jordan as Sue and Johnny Storm?
I actually love Michael B. Jordan as Johnny Storm. I don't like him more than Chris Evans, but they're two different versions of Johnny Storm.
I think Michael B. Jordan is probably my favorite out of the cast out of the five, we'll say, with Victor included.
I agree. He's obviously he plays the hothead very well.
Yeah, I think his look too when he's the Human Torch actually looks great with the eyes and everything. I think that, and I actually I do kind of like the look of the Thing. So I think those two are kind of my favorite aspects of them, or maybe designs, I guess, of the movie.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I love the look of the Human Torch when Johnny when he is fully flamed out. He looks very comic book accurate when he's flamed out because like his body is like dark orange and it's dope. And I agree. I like the look of the Thing as well in most scenes that he's in. There are some scenes that it looks a little silly, like in the third act. But I love when they come from Planet Zero and they're held captive.
Yes,
and he's like stuck in the rocks and trying to like break himself free. That might be my favorite scene in the movies when they return from Planet Zero. I love everything about that scene. If I'm being honest, and I even love how they represent Reed's powers. So he's not necessarily stretching himself. It's actually the opposite. So the planet affected his physiology to where his mass is like expanded, and so he has to build a suit to keep himself together. That's why it has the springs on it, and I hadn't realized that until this last watch. This might be my fourth time watching this movie, and I was like, that actually is not silly. Because let's be honest, Reed Richards got a silly power.
Sure. And no matter what, no matter how serious the movie, it will always look cartoony.
Yeah.
Because it's a cartoony power.
Right. And I was like, that is I think that's the best you're gonna get with Reed Richards, as far as, and a practical realistic representation of his powers. He's been stretched. So if he wasn't wearing that suit or those coils, he wouldn't be able to hold himself together. He'd just be spaghetti all the time.
That's pretty cool. I actually didn't pick up on that either. So that's interesting. I may have to. I'm not really going to be rushing to rewatch this movie, but I may have to rewatch maybe that part to kind of pick up on that. Yeah. That's another aspect of the movie that I don't love is the super suits, and really it's really just Reed and Johnny, because Kate, Sue's doesn't really
got on regular clothes.
Yeah, she looks like she just mostly has regular clothes on and like gloves, and then
Ben is naked.
This version of the Thing doesn't wear anything, which I think works. It is kind of silly to see. I liked how the Tim Story movies put him in pants, but it looks fine, this version, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I don't love the costumes, and I really especially didn't like Reed's, but I thought it was because I thought it was the opposite. I thought the coils like kind of allowed the suit to stretch, with him. I didn't realize it was kind of keeping him in.
That could be. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how it looked to me. Because when he was on the table, he was all stretched out, and it took him a while to kind of pull himself together. So I thought the coils were, keeping him together,
right?
So he wouldn't be, his body wouldn't be noodle like all the time,
right. Yeah, and then Johnny Storm's suit is just black with like kind of these sections that I assume are flame resistant and stuff.
Yeah, I assume they were like vents because he's always hot,
right?
So they kind of ventilate the air,
right?
So he can cool himself off because he's always hot. So.
Right. Yeah. It's just and I applaud Josh Trank for trying to do something different, but obvious. And I granted this, maybe they were waiting for the sequel to include maybe more Fantastic Four uniform kind of suits, but that it just was a little too far away from the source material, I think, for me to appreciate it.
Yeah, I can respect that. I like when filmmakers take risks.
Sure.
I seem to be the odd man out when it comes to superhero movies and comic book accuracy. Like I'm more of a fan of the essence of characters rather than the specifics.
Right.
Like, for instance, people are losing their minds over Wolverine in the yellow suit, and I don't dislike it. I'm happy that we finally have it. But do you see how long it took them to get it right? I don't think that I think that they didn't do it because they knew it was going to look silly. It was like, we're not going to do this until we can do it right. Like, I'm not a fan of comic book accuracy just for the sake of comic book accuracy, because not everything translates well to the big screen. Sometimes even the small screen. If you look at The Flash, his last suit had yellow boots, and it looks ridiculous to me. It just, I'm like that. It is so comic book accurate that it's an eyesore because they're these big yellow boots. Yeah. And I really don't like it. And even with, some of the storylines, it's like, do you really, like, take the MCU for example. The MCU is really its own thing. They take little things here and there from the comics. Most of it is influenced by the Ultimate version of the comics, but they do take some stuff from the 616 continuity and, kind of marry it with the Ultimate continuity and build their own thing from the director standpoint, or at least what Kevin Feige will allow. But I like most of the MCU, and I like most of the things that they have done different with the MCU. So, comic book accuracy is not a make or break for me with superhero movies. And, just like this, the comic book accuracy didn't bother me, or the lack of comic book accuracy didn't bother me that much.
Right.
It was more of the story. Yeah. How it turned into a completely different movie. Yeah. After the halfway mark, and just the underutilization of the characters were, to me, the biggest flaws of the movie.
Yeah. And to an extent, I think I agree with you. I think, it is about the essence of the characters. Mm-hmm. For example, speaking of Wolverine, I had no problems with not seeing Hugh Jackman in the yellow suit. Mm-hmm. Even in the first X-Men, when they're all wearing black leather, like, it worked for me because, the characters were all there. It's just, they just weren't wearing their '90s costumes, which would have probably looked silly. It would have.
Yeah, in 2000, they would have looked absolutely ridiculous.
And I think, especially back then in 2000, when comic book movies were fairly new, or at least they weren't like they are today. People we
were just entering the golden age,
right,
of comic book movies, because all we had up until that point was Christopher Reeve, Superman, and then a handful of Batman,
right, and then you had
and Blade.
Yeah. So I don't think people would have taken it seriously had they shown up in bright yellow and blue and and Rogue and her green and stuff like that. So
right,
I think they were smart in doing it a different way. So like I said, I can appreciate that Josh Trank tried something new. I don't know. Maybe I just don't really like the design of this, especially Reed's. I just don't think I like the coils, even though the reason for it makes sense to me. It's just kind of, I don't know, looks silly. But like I said, maybe Josh Trank's idea was in the next movie Reed would figure out new suits for them or something. I don't know, but yeah, that's one of the aspects that didn't quite work for me. One of the things that I actually do really like is Jamie Bell's performance as the Thing. He's angry at Reed for sure, and I like that aspect, but he's kind of a soft-spoken Ben Grimm. And it works really well when he's the Thing. It's so much different than the Michael Chiklis version, or the way he's portrayed in the comics.
Yeah.
And I can understand why if you don't like it, but for me it really worked. So even though I don't think Jamie Bell physically was Ben Grimm, I think he actually did a great job as, as his portrayal of the Thing.
No, I echoing everything you said. I agree. I have nothing new to add to that. I agree with everything you said about the Thing.
Yeah.
Kate Mara. We didn't talk too much about Kate Mara. Yeah. So I like Kate Mara, but there's something lacking, and I don't know what it is. Because I wrote in my notes, like, I like her, and I like the direction she took the character, or how the character was written. Because to me, I'm not gonna say that she's better than Jessica Alba, but I prefer this darker version of Sue. But it's lacking something, and I can't quite put my finger on it.
I agree, and I don't know what it is either, but I know it's missing something. Yeah. I really like Kate Mara, and I like her interpretation of Sue. I like the Sue in this movie. I like that she's smart and that she can kind of keep up with Reed, that she's a big part of this program. She's not just his girlfriend or wife, or whatever. I really, but at the same time, there's something missing, and I really am not sure what it is, but yeah, I agree with what you said. It's she, I think, is a good choice to play Sue Storm. But it's just something's not there, and I don't know if it's her, or if it's the script, or if it's, I don't know.
Yeah,
I would lean towards the script or the movie or whatever. But
it's really tough to put my finger on. I wish I had a word for what it is that is lacking, but I just don't.
Right.
I really like Franklin Richards, played by Reggie Cathy. I really like Franklin Richards.
I agree.
I thought that was a brilliant decision to have him in the movie, and he's the one kind of bringing the team together. Or did I say Richards? I meant Storm.
Yeah, I know. I know what you meant.
Franklin Richards is their son.
Right.
But yeah, Franklin Storm is really good in this movie. I love his interaction, his relationship with Johnny. to me, they really feel like father and son.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of Johnny, I like the fact that Johnny is he's really smart in this movie. He's not just a jock or an athlete or just a daredevil.
Right.
He actually has a pretty high IQ, which is why part of the reason why his dad hired him. He hired him as a punishment for wrecking.
But he knew
his
that
car.
he could.
Yeah, he knew he could do the work and keep up. Yeah, so.
And I like too that he's, Reed and Victor and Sue are all very smart when it comes to like the science, and Johnny is they say like he can build anything. Yeah. So like he's also really good in terms of like building the actual equipment and everything, which I thought was really smart as well.
Yeah.
And I like how when he first shows up, Reed's like, I could actually use some help. And he's like, have you ever welded before? And Johnny's like, yeah. Like, of course.
Yeah, because he put that car together.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So Tim Blake Nelson, his character. I don't like his character.
Well, he's kind of meant to be disliked, but I like Tim Blake Nelson, but his character is very generic in my opinion. He's just the typical CEO who's evil and only cares about profits or whatever. Or the chairman of the board or whatever he is, but he's just that typical. He's just a very generic.
He's the unobtainium guy.
Yes, exactly. And once they figure out how to, they send a chimpanzee to the other dimension and bring him back. And once that happens, he's like, "All right, time to get NASA involved." And everybody's like, "What?" And he's like, "Good job, guys, but let's leave this to the professionals," or whatever he says to them. It's very condescending, And that's actually what sets them in motion to do it themselves because they want to do it. They want to be the first. So
and that scene is actually another good scene in the movie. I don't necessarily like how that scene starts because it starts with Victor asking them if they want to get a drink, and I don't think Doom is the type of guy to get drunk. I think Doom would see that as a waste of time.
Right.
But once the scene gets going and they start talking about Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, they were like who those guys are. You don't know who the guys are who built the ship.
The shuttle. Yeah. Exactly.
I was
or
like
the Apollo or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like that. That's what this movie is. That's what this movie is. That's what Josh Trank wanted to do. And I'm like, man, can't we get more of that?
Yeah. I was going to ask you how you felt about it, but I'll go ahead and tell you how I feel about it. I like that this movie takes their origin and changes it because, typically the origin of the Fantastic Four is they all go to space.
Yes.
And there's something in space that they encounter that gives them their powers. And so I like the idea that they have built something that takes them to a different dimension. I like that whole aspect. It has nothing to do with space travel, which would have been probably difficult to do in a more serious tone movie. It worked for the Tim Story, the 2004 or whatever it was, Fantastic Four, but for this one, I think it would have been a little hokey for what they were trying to do. And so this origin story, I think, worked pretty well.
I agree. I love the fact that I wouldn't say he's the catalyst, but because they were already kind of working on it before, but pretty much Reed is the catalyst for what is going on because he discovers. Yeah, he doesn't really invent it. He discovers interdimensional travel, which
without even realizing it.
Yeah, without even realizing it, and it's like. Because he thought that he was sending stuff to China or India or something.
Right.
He's like, no, you actually sending it to another dimension. It's like, oh, okay. And Victor had actually figured out how to do it. He just couldn't
make it work.
Well, yeah, he couldn't make it work. He figured out. He knew that it was possible. He just couldn't make it work. And Reed made it work.
Yeah.
All by himself. Like he didn't even know of.
As a kid,
as a kid, he didn't even know of the Baxter building or Victor Von Doom or anything. He figured all of that out on his own, and I thought that was that was awesome. Like it felt so sci-fi.
Right.
And that's the one thing that's another thing that I really like about this movie is that it feels so science fiction. Like it's more of a science fiction movie than it is a fantasy movie.
Right.
And I like that. But I guess we hear now. Once they come back from Planet Zero and they make that time jump.
Yeah, the time jump is what kills it.
Oh my God.
From that moment on, it's a bad movie.
I was telling my wife, I was like, this movie is so frustrating because it starts off pretty strong.
Yeah.
And they just Thelma and Louise it
right off the cliff.
Yeah, right off the cliff. And I'm like, what are you doing? The thing that really, really bothers me is that Reed does something that is so out of character.
Right.
He runs away.
Yeah.
Reed would never do that.
Right.
He would never do that. That's why he has the powers that he has. He's always overextending himself and overcommitting in order to get the job done. Reed would never, ever run away.
Right.
That pissed me off so much.
Yeah. I understand the motivation behind it. It's like he feels like he's being held prisoner, so he wouldn't be able to figure out how to solve the problem by staying. But I just don't buy the fact that Reed would stay hidden for over a year.
A year? Like what?
Without even attempting to communicate with Ben.
Right.
Just
best
letting
friend.
Ben. Yeah, exactly. Just letting Ben think that he's abandoned him. It just doesn't ring true to the character.
That he would never ever do that, man. Yeah. That was a terrible decision. Yeah. And maybe that was Josh Trank's decision. I don't know, but goodness gracious, that infuriated me.
Right. And during that time, right after that 1 year later, that was the first time I noticed a lot of the reshoots with Kate Mara and her wig.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was this montage. It was Tim Blake Nelson talking to like a group of people, and he's talking about them and their powers. And so that's how we see like Kate Mara, using her force field powers, and Johnny Storm, flying and throwing fireballs, and then the Thing ripping off tops of tanks and stuff like that. And I was like, it just is so weird to go from them coming back from the crash, and then suddenly they're like experts at their power. Like it just the 1 year jump it didn't feel right.
What they should have done was once they come back from Planet Zero, they should have like they should have scrapped the project.
Right.
That's what they should have done. They should have scrapped the project. Everybody goes home. They keep the four to do what they're gonna do, but all four of them decide to leave together.
Right.
And what I would have done was the goal of this is to try to get Victor back.
Yeah. That's
what I would have done. Maybe some people wouldn't like that. I don't know. I really don't care. That's what I would have done. But I would, because they went into that. All five of them were in it together. And Reed and Victor especially were on one accord when they decided to go to Planet Zero. And I definitely see Reed feeling tremendously guilty for that. And I could see them leaving wherever they were, the lab or whatever, going somewhere else, going back to New York or whatever, and rebuilding the project to go get Victor.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's what I would have done. And I also would have fleshed out Victor a little bit more. I would have given him a few more scenes with Reed and Sue especially.
Right. And
just, kind of get a few glimpses of his backstory in Latveria. And kind of will definitely giving him a stronger motivation, or a motivation at all, because he has none in this movie. Like he just wants to be left alone. And I want to be left alone sometimes, but that's not enough to make a a movie out of.
No. And so this is one of my last notes, but one of the things I wrote was, they finally find Reed, and they bring him back because they need his help, because they've basically recreated the machine, but they can't figure this like last piece of the puzzle out. They need Reed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So they bring him in, and he's like, okay, no problem, I can figure it out. And the whole point of it is they want to try to find a cure for these people, right? Like, that's the whole reason that they're trying to get back to this. At least that's what Franklin
That's what they
says.
say.
Yeah, that's what Franklin says anyway. They're trying to figure out a cure, and in order to do that, they have to go back to that dimension. And so I said, if the whole point is to find a cure, why send in new people who could potentially get hurt or also get powers or something?
Right.
Like, it makes no sense to me that Reed would just be okay with them sending in this whole new team. He'd be like, I would think he'd be like, I've been there. I know how dangerous it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we should go back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It just seemed weird to me that they sent this other team in that finds Victor and then brings Victor back. That was another weird aspect of the second half of the movie.
No, I agree. That's definitely weird. It definitely doesn't make any sense. Along with other things in this movie, and at least in the second half. But Victor coming back just should have been. I'm not saying that it's not a big deal, because it is a big deal. Like, he's the whole reason for the final act of the movie. But it just gets very Hollywood. Just, a beam in the sky. And he just wants to destroy the Earth just for the sake of destroying the Earth.
Right. He was like, your planet basically had its chance. Now I'm going to destroy it for no reason.
Yeah. And again, like that's something that Doom would not do. Doom wants the world to be a better place. What he should have done was use that anger that he had towards the world and its systems. Use all of that anger and emotion to try to make the world better, but obviously do it in an evil way, in a villainous Dr. Doom way.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like, bro, like, you one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. Like, you too discovered interdimensional travel, and now all you want to do is destroy the Earth just for the sake of destroying the Earth. Like, that just makes no sense. That's just a waste of intelligence to me.
Right. Yeah. It's a waste of Dr. Doom.
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels very hollow, his motivation.
Yeah, extremely hollow.
And it is a beam in the sky, and it is supposed to be like a global threat. Like, we see portions of the Earth kind of being sucked in. We see all these cars being sucked in and people running away, but it doesn't feel like a global threat.
Not at all. And like, why would they that's another thing. Why would they make the threat so big,
right,
for such a small movie?
Right.
Like, the first half of this movie, I don't think the movie was ever supposed to be this big global threat
thing. Yeah, I don't think so either.
Because the movie is very character centric.
Right.
Most of it is people talking to each other.
Yeah.
A lot of it, they don't really have much important to say except for those scenes in the beginning, like we discussed earlier. But this movie is a very small, contained type sci-fi drama.
Mm-hmm.
And then they try to turn it into a fantasy action movie, and that's not what this movie is.
Right. And I wonder if that's what the studio had a problem with. I wonder if the studio, this was in 2015, so Marvel had just finished like phase 1, or a couple years before had kind of finished phase 1, and
they were at the end of phase 2 in 2015.
So, Marvel was making probably billions of dollars off of some of their movies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if the studio watched the first cut of this movie and said, this is not big enough. This is not a $1 billion moneymaker. We need something bigger.
It's the Fantastic Four. It wasn't going to make $1 billion. Like, it's not enough interest in the Fantastic. That's another thing that the movie had going against it is the public interest in the Fantastic Four. People just didn't want the movie to begin with.
Sure.
Because I remember when they announced it, they was like, really? Another Fantastic Four movie? Like, okay.
Right. And, you know, I like the Fantastic Four, and so was on board for another one.
Mm-hmm.
And when the first trailer came out, I was kind of excited about it because it looked cool. You know, and because probably most of it was from the first half of the movie.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to Marvel's Fantastic Four. I did write down that I hope when they make it, it's not an origin story. I hope they're just the team when the movie, kind of like with Spider-Man, you know, they're just, he's already Spider-Man. I hope they're already the Fantastic Four for their movie. Because I don't think we need yet another origin story.
What I would have loved to have happened was, they can't do it now, but I would have loved for, because it would have been similar to this, I would have loved for Reed to be the reason for multi-dimensional travel, for the multiverse.
Oh yeah, that would have been cool.
Reed is the smartest person in his universe, and he would be kind of like the Tony Stark of his universe,
right?
Where Tony Stark discovered time travel, Reed Richards discovered the multiverse.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
And that would have been brilliant. And like maybe at the end of, I don't know, the end game or I don't know, something, we see this portal open and Reed walks out.
Yeah.
And like that would have, I would have loved to have seen that. I've had that in my head since like 2016.
That would have been cool.
Yeah,
I'll be interested to see what they do with that movie.
I don't know how they're gonna make it. I don't know how it's how it can't be an origin story if they're gonna be in the MCU. How are you gonna have somebody as smart as Reed not ever show up?
That's true. I guess that's a good point.
Yeah. Reed is one of the smartest people in the Marvel universe. Like,
unless they do what you said, and they come to our universe or something from another universe.
Yeah, like I feel like that's the only way that it could work. Like with the I thought that maybe they were gonna do that with the X-Men, but it looks like they're gonna start the X-Men over from scratch and give them their origin in the MCU.
Interesting.
Because that's another thing that I would have liked for the X-Men to have already existed in their universe and kind of come over to the MCU universe, because the world of X-Men is so big and so vast. That's why they have their own universe, because it's just so big. It's incredibly convoluted with Fox, but
right. So the final act of this movie just also feels so fast.
Yep.
Like they follow Doom to the other dimension, and yes, they like try to fight him and can't at first, but then Reed gives his little I know this movie came out first, but it's the Zack Snyder's Justice League, you know. They've never fought us, not us united. You know?
I thought of that
too. He gives that little speech and they're like, cool, and they all fight him. They win, and it's over very quickly.
Yep.
And then once they win, you know, there's the scene with the military where the military gives them some sort of deal. I forget what the deal is, but they offer him a deal, and Reed's like, nope, no, we're not going to do that. We need a place to work. And they give it to him, and then that's the end of the movie. The end of the movie is so fast.
Yeah.
It just feels so rushed. And like I said, if the plan was to actually kill off Doom in this movie, that is such a middle finger to the character of Dr. Doom.
And another thing is that the movie is trying to resolve itself with plot, but it leaves all the character stuff wide open.
Right.
Nobody's arc is resolved at all.
Right.
Because like they're all of a sudden not mad at Reed anymore.
Right.
Like I know Reed and Ben have their little talk, but I mean, come on, like they sweep a lot of that under the rug. And like I said, this was supposed to be a character driven movie, and all of the character stuff is just flushed down the toilet in favor of that whack third act.
Even when Franklin dies, it doesn't feel like it has any sort of emotional punch to it. You know what I mean? It's
not at all.
Sue and Johnny run up and they're like, no. But then they seem to get over it very quickly in order to fight Dr. Doom. It's just
And him dying is like a blink and you'll miss it moment.
Right.
Yeah, because it's I always forget that he dies in this movie.
Yeah. Before we do our ratings, I did write down the Rotten Tomato score, which is 9%. So only 9% of critics gave it a favorable review, which is pretty low. Because, like you said,
think?
Yeah, I mean it's low, but I don't know if I would give it such a low score. There are some aspects of this movie that are enjoyable. Overall, though, you can't help. I mean, like you said, once it does the time jump, it just falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that is where the Fantastic Four are like introduced. Basically, once they get their powers, the movie falls apart. And so up until that, it's pretty good. Then once you get to the part where like us superhero fans are waiting for, it just dies. Yeah. So for me, I think I would give it. Gosh, I'm leaning between a 1.5 and 2, and I think I'm leaning. I think I'm going to go pretty harsh on it and go 1.5, just because I do really like Jamie Bell's version of the Thing. I like Johnny Storm, but I just don't know if I like those things enough to rewatch this movie that often. And so it's pretty low on the list for me in terms of Marvel movies. And I know this isn't an MCU movie, but in terms of Marvel produced films, and I got to go 1.5.
I'm not gonna go quite that low. I'm struggling between a 2 and a 2.5.
Yeah,
because I know I'm in the minority, but there's a lot that I like about this movie.
Sure,
but there's an equal amount that I don't like about the movie, and because it's an equal amount of like and dislike, I think I'm gonna give it a 2.5.
Yeah, and that seems fair. For me, I don't think there's enough that I like that outweighs the stuff I don't like.
Yeah. For me, there's not enough that I like that outweighs the stuff that I don't like, but there's not enough stuff that I don't like that outweighs the stuff that I like. It's just balanced. Yeah. Right. There's some really good stuff about this movie.
Yeah.
There's some really crappy things about this movie.
Right.
I love the tone. I love the fact that they decided to go with a sci-fi drama rather than a fantasy comedy.
Right.
But I absolutely hate what they do with Reed and Dr. Doom in the second half of this movie. Those two things and the third act, which I mean, that goes hand in hand. Yeah, Dr. Doom. Those two things ruined the movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think had Josh Trank done what he wanted to do, it may have been at least a 3.5. At least a 3.5. I don't know if it would have been a brilliant movie,
right?
But
it had to have been better than this, though.
Yeah. Like Jeremy Irons said, I haven't seen the Snyder cut, but it couldn't possibly be worse than
right, exactly
the theatrical version. So that's where I'm at with it. Like, we'll never get to see it, but it could not possibly be worse than this.
Surely. Well, we'd love to know what you think about Fant4stic. You can always leave us a comment on cinemaheroes.com, or you can tweet at us or comment on our Instagram. Both handles are @CinemaHeroes. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can always leave a comment down below, like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'd love to hear from you, however you want to reach out to us. I think that about wraps it up for this episode, though. I'm Justin Speck.
I'm Jay Stu.
As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing.